In the last episode, we saw the Make in India Summit kick off with an opening address by the executive editor of ET Now, Sandeep Gurumurthy, which was followed by the welcome address by Dr. Naushad Forbes and the keynote address by Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman. This week, we bring to you highlights from a panel discussion on the topic India as a global manufacturing hub.
I know the lion is symbolic of the Make in India initiative, but let's first address the elephant in the room, which is, so to say, slightly on a provocative note. Ms. Sitharaman, would you concede that Indian corporates are probably not as bullish as foreign corporates? Would you agree on that? And do you think that that's the reason why the investment cycle hasn't turned?
Yeah, I think the Indian corporates are being cautious. And strictly speaking, I think the time for caution is over. They should move forward and have the similar bullishness, if not in degree, at least they should have the bullishness which is expressed by or manifested in the investments which are coming from abroad.
Mr. Baba Kalyani, comment on that, because you've heavily invested over the last 24 months. We've seen a slew of reforms that sort of affect sectors that you are invested in, defense being a classic example. What is it that you are seeing when it comes to the manufacturing potential in India that, say, some of your peers aren't?
I have always, as an organization, believed in investing ahead of time. And therefore, maybe we are a little bit different from other industrial companies that invest when the demand comes up. You talked about the defense sector. You know, the physical demand from the defense sector is not yet there. But we can now see at a reasonable distance that this demand is going to come. And why do we see it? We see it because the government has put in policy framework in place, which was missing for many, many years. Given a little bit of support from the system, in 10 years, we can be the top 3 in many of these products. That doesn't mean we are going to be top 3 making fighter planes, no. But there is a range of products like we have done in the automotive sector, like we have done in the component sector, where we will become a major player in the world. Because A, we are good at manufacturing, B, we are very competitive.
Dr. Forbes, since you're representative of industry at large in this panel, what do you think is the reason why there's still this sort of lack of revival in the investment cycle? Is it because, like the minister pointed out, people are cautious? Is it because they're still nursing the wounds of the last decade or so? What do you sort of think?
I think it's really a demand question, where I think as we've had relatively slow industrial growth over several years, companies have done various kinds of debottlenecking operations which have increased capacity maybe 5, 7, 8% year on year on year. And they've built up then a fair amount of capacity which still needs to be absorbed from growth in demand. The growth in demand that we've seen in the last 6 months has been very significant, and it's been spreading across sectors. Our own projection is that by the end of this financial year, we'll see that cycle start to turn. But I fully agree with Baba, and I fully agree with our minister, that I think the time for caution is over. I think as firms, we need to invest significantly in our capacity and in our capabilities.
Mr. Bharat, when do you see this investment cycle turn? Do you think we're 6 months away?
As far as our industry is concerned, we have no issues on capacity. But I think the things which we should be looking at, that Make in India should really become make competitively in India. I think the emphasis on competitive manufacturing is extremely important because competitiveness implies both quality and cost of production. The success of this effort would be visible if a lot of foreign investors start investing in India, not only for the domestic market, because they find that investing in India will lead to products being made here, which can be competitively exported out of India.
And there are a whole host of factors there which we will briefly touch upon, but one thing that I hear a lot from corporates is one of the reasons why investments aren't happening is because the banking system is choked. And we have an ace banker in Mr. Tiwari here in our panel. What's your sense, Mr. Tiwari? Do you think the pressure on the banking system is sort of eased now, and do you think the flow of credit will once again improve to the corporate sector at large?
You know, remember one thing, banking sector reflects the economy. None of us knew 4 years back that economy will not do good for so long. So we were also under stress. Now, we are asked typically more out of fashion two questions, NPA and capital. You know, of all public sector banks, I can vouch for my numbers, about 65% NPA is core sector. So even if we tend to believe IMF number of 7.6% growth, that cannot happen till such time core sector is fixed. And when we talk about core sector, we talk about steel, we talk about cement, we talk about roads, we talk about power. From 6.5 kilometers per day now to 30-35 kilometers a day road. So what we are seeing in two sectors of late now for last 6 months or so, cement and steel both. EBITDA positivity is there. So going forward, as the economy picks up, our woes of NPA will be taken care of in due course, and that will release the capital, whatever is the provision. So I don't think in the times to come when this cycle turns around for growth, we are very well geared to fund that growth.
Ms. Seetharaman, interest rates, that gets talked about a lot in the media and by sections of the industry as well. How big a factor do you think is that when it comes to reviving investments? Do you believe that now there is a strong case for a sharp rate cut given the fact that the inflation is sort of stabilized over the last few months?
I think Indian banks, irrespective of whether they are public sector banks or private banks, I would think will have to do a complete brainstorming within themselves, within their organizations, to see how best they understand SMEs in India. Because I find SMEs are going to be the biggest engines, powerful engines to move our economy forward. And unless we understand the SMEs' nature of business, nature of cash liquidity expectations that they have, nature of turnover, their business module, we are not going to be able to help them, and in turn they won't be able to help the Indian economy to grow. So I would strongly think that this is the time when banks will have to understand how do we fund and how do we sustain funding for SMEs. And they are all over the country giving employment opportunities wherever they are for semi-skilled and skilled workers. With Government Skill India initiative going the way it is going, it's going to now have a big pool of people who are looking for employment. The second, of course, is nicely explained side of things about non-performing assets in banks, how industry, particularly those belonging to core sector, are largely the ones who are there. There is now a lot of initiative taken by the government where you're talking with the industry, talking with the banks to make sure that somehow these the revival packages that you would offer for those sick industry makes sense. So that has to be worked with right earnest seriousness, and I think NPAs of the past will have to be seen as you really cannot move forward unless you're going to be able to address it and not look at it as a curse and not look at it as, oh my God, what has this particular sector done to itself? Now I think it's time to forget all that, but try to get them out of that malaise and make them move forward. So it has got to have government, it has to have banks, both private and public sector. It has to have that industry also understanding that they can't wallow in that NPA situation for too long. They have to come out of it. They have to be responsibly coming out of it. So I think there's a lot of need for synergies with the bank industry, CII, FICCI and ASSOCHAM. All of them will have to work together. There's no way in which India can sit and watch this situation any longer, government inclusive.
We've seen a big NPA turn last few days with the SR Oil deal getting done, which is encouraging. But on interest rates, Ms. Seetharaman, do you think there's scope for sort of significant cut in interest rates?
I'll leave that question for the moment with the Monetary Policy Committee, and they've done a very good beginning, and I'm sure I have the confidence that they'll take the economy forward.
despite the investments that we are seeing, despite this fantastic Make in India program, the sort of job creation that a country like India needs is monumental. And how do we create those kind of jobs over the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years?
You know, if you're looking at manufacturing to create jobs on the scale that this country really requires, 100 million new jobs to be created, 10 million a month or something like that, I don't think manufacturing is going to make it, do it, at least not at the initial stage. Maybe when manufacturing becomes 25% of GDP and the GDP of India is running at $6 or $7 trillion, so manufacturing is 1.2 trillion, 4 times of what it is today, you will have a tremendous number of jobs. So it's a little bit like the chicken and the egg. However, a lot of jobs are getting created because of the manufacturing sector in the secondary sector. Okay? If a manufacturing industry, take Pune for example, an automobile company comes to Pune. It employs 3,000 people, producing, sets up a plant to make 300,000 cars. It's another matter they're making 30,000, but sets up a plant to make 300,000 cars. Now all of a sudden there is a whole lot of supply industries that are coming around this company. So 100 more smaller companies that come around it. They all need apartments and buildings and schools, and so there's a big, huge new infrastructure that starts getting developed. And a lot of jobs start getting created in making this happen. So there's a huge multiplier effect that will create jobs through the manufacturing sector, and manufacturing sector generating a percentage of GDP that is higher than what it is today. So we have to look at it that way. But what worries me more is when urbanization starts increasing in India. Today, what, 50% or 60% of our population still depends on agriculture for their livelihood, whereas it's 3% in the United States. Let's say we come down to 30%. You're talking about 30% of our population, 400 million people, moving from the rural part of this country into urban or semi-urban part of this country, and they need jobs. And that's our biggest challenge. And they need jobs, and before that they need skills to create those jobs. How are we going to do this is really a challenge.
Agarwala, a company like GE must be facing this dilemma everywhere. In all countries that you operate in, there must be this pressure to create more jobs. How do you comment on that? Because the world of manufacturing is changing as technology is disrupting every manufacturing process. So the pressure, how does one sort of balance this pressure of using enough technology, creating more jobs? How does that work?
I think we need to understand that manufacturing is changing dramatically and very rapidly because of technology. 3D printing, additive manufacturing, these are no longer exotic terminologies or methods. I would argue that within the next 5 years, that is the way of things to come. And therefore, how are we skilling our people to embrace all those things? Are we still teaching our people to read drawings from paper and use a drawing board to make drawings, or are we digitizing them, or are we getting them more intelligent in terms of being digitally literate and so on? Those are the aspects I think that we would need to focus on. I would again say that India is uniquely positioned. I can say this with our own experience in GE, that the ability of our younger generation to absorb the newer dimensions of technology is tremendous. It is better than, I would argue, any other place in the world. The ability that women have shown to further absorb newer technology is even better. So I think we've got an advantage. But we need to orient ourselves in that direction and not go back to the traditional methods of manufacturing, learning manufacturing, and so on. So I think we've got a great advantage. We need to leverage it, but understand that technology is a massive differentiator here when it comes to manufacturing.
Seetharaman, RIP traditional manufacturing, that's the sense that one is getting from both Mr. Kalyani and Mr. Agarwala here. We want to comment on both the points that they made. One, on this large-scale migration that we're likely to see, how we're going to create jobs, and more importantly, how we're going to skill this workforce that's going to move from rural centers to urban India.
See, the point about skilling I'm glad to say that the Prime Minister, because he had this vision about technology and digital technology in particular, guiding the development course that we want to take, has really shown itself in the way in which we are planning for skilling our young. This Skill India program is not bereft of that thought that you have to move with technology for a futuristic production. So, we are conscious that we are not preparing youngsters for a production methodology which existed 20, 30 years ago, but for looking forward and giving them the readiness to be employed in a technology driven industrial production area. And the larger point of migration, in fact, even as we were talking about manufacturing hub, India becoming a manufacturing hub, the need for Make in India, the emphasis which the Prime Minister is giving was recognizing that there is going to be a major shift from agriculture where there is a huge underemployment, and that's been recognized by this government. And we recognize the fact also that people moving out of, even if there is a generation gap, people moving out of agriculture are not going to be readily employable by the services sector, which is technology dominant. And therefore, we are addressing it. Let's wait and see what the outcome is going to be.
Mr. Bhargav, one issue that doesn't get talked about a lot is on labor productivity. And I saw this fascinating McKinsey study that indicated that, that workers in China and Thailand are 4 to 5 times more productive than workers in India. Would you agree with that? Is there such a big gap between productivity, and what can corporate India do to make them more productive?
As far as our company is concerned, Suzuki has factories in China, they have factories here. They tell me that productivity of workers in India is better than the productivity of workers in China. So, but that's not across the board. And I think it's a big topic where I think the employer has a lot to do about the productivity increases of their workers. Because unless you win the confidence of the workers, that the workers and the management are together in promoting the company and growing the company, and both will share the benefits in some fair, reasonable manner, you will not get the productivity increases. And I think that's the basic thing, that when we are talking of Make in India and all that, the point I wanted to make was, we have all talked about government having to do a lot of things for making this happen. But I think there's an equal amount which has to be done by the private sector to exhibit that they deserve the things which government is being asked to do, and that they will handle that in a responsible manner for the national good.
Let me get closing comments from all my panelists. Dr. Forbes, I'll start with you. One thing that you think the government can do, and one thing that you think the industry should do to make India a global manufacturing hub.
For the government, I think continue the focus on ease of doing business. I think that's a wonderful initiative, and it's an initiative that we all need to participate in. But I think that's the key focus that the government should have. Keep improving the business climate in general, keep improving the ease of doing business, keep working with the states, getting the states to compete one with the other, as is happening now. So keep that momentum going, and we should all be participating in it. From the industry perspective, I think the key issue is investing in technology, in capabilities, in innovation. I think there's a lot that we can do. There's a huge potential there. Many foreign companies have recognized the capabilities of our engineers and invested very strongly in R&D facilities in India. We need to do the same as Indian industry and invest a lot more strongly in our own innovation capabilities and our own R&D capabilities than we do now.
Mr. Baba Kalani, 25% contribution of manufacturing to GDP. Do you see that happening?
In my lifetime, yes, for sure. And let me just add one more point to this. You know, we all talked about SMEs, we all talked about how they have problems with technology, problems with finances, problems with quality. My bet is that in 15 years, SMEs in India will have better technology than most big companies.
Mr. Tiwari, your one thing that you think the banking system, the financial system can do to help Make in India, and what is it that you'd like to see the government do as well?
Look, if the history is of any indication, the bankers have played a great role in the nation building, and we shall continue to do that, especially to the MSME sector in the times to come.
Sure. Mr. Agrawala, your view on what you think that corporate India can do, because there's a lot that foreign companies are doing. What is that corporate India can do in terms of lessons that you've seen comparing to other emerging markets, and how they've moved when it comes to building their manufacturing prowess?
We just need to think even bigger about manufacturing. It is not just about India. I think we need to look at India as a manufacturing hub for the world. And if that's the approach, then it needs to be globally competitive, which means we need to compare everything, not just ease of doing business, but every line. Is it taxation? Is it ease of doing business? Is it productivity? Is it skills? But we have a head start in each one of these items, especially when it comes to people. We need to leverage that and do it much faster. Because speed is not something which is really a forte that we have as a country, so we need to do it much faster. But I think the future is certainly ours.
Ma'am, according to you, what's the one big challenge that we need to overcome?
We need to believe in ourselves. We need to believe in ourselves, and we need to believe that this government is willing to hear, willing to engage, and therefore we need to keep the engagement on.
On that optimistic note, thank you so much, ma'am, for that wonderful insight, and to this lovely panel for sharing these thoughts, and for this wonderful discussion that we had on what we need to do to make India a global manufacturing hub. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for this panel.
Make in India is basically an initiative where we as government try to identify what are the things that need to be done to promote manufacturing in our country.
India is growing at the rate of about 7.5% per annum. Our challenge is to grow at higher rates of 9 to 10% over a long period of time.